Hello everyone. Tonight we are going to explore the earliest days of Wu Zetian's life in a world where mist drifts over the rolling hills of Lakdyung and the scent of incense mingles with the earthy aroma of wet soil. The mountains stand as silent witnesses, their peaks softened by the pale light of dawn, while the wind carries whispers from distant temples. In these quiet valleys, a young girl moves among stone steps, worn smooth by generations, her small hands brushing over carvings that seem to tell stories older than anyone can remember. The air is crisp and cool, and the faint, persistent hum of insects fills the spaces between the trees, a natural symphony that marks the passing of days in a rhythm both gentle and unyielding. From her earliest moments, Wu Zetian is surrounded by the complex layering of family expectations and societal norms. Children learn early about hierarchy, obedience, and the delicate balance between curiosity and caution. Her mother teaches her to watch the flutter of a sparrow's wings, to notice how the petals of a blossom fall, to listen carefully to the cadence of chants from the nearby temple. The lessons are subtle, imparted in observation and repetition more than in words. Is it possible that these early exercises in patience and perception plant the seeds of strategic thinking that will later shape an empire? Life in the village is disciplined yet permeated by ritual. Meals are simple but prepared with meticulous care. Steamed buns, freshly ground grains, and teas infused with mountain herbs. Even playtime carries lessons. Children race along paths that wind through bamboo groves, yet each step is mindful, measured. Stories of ancestors, of local gods and spirits, are told beside fires that flicker in rhythm with the heartbeats of those listening. Could it be that the rhythm of these tales, woven with fear, reverence and wonder, imprints a deep understanding of human belief and behavior in the young mind? Her father, a man of modest standing but keen intelligence, often brings home scrolls of poetry or philosophical aphorisms. The parchment smells faintly of the ink used to record distant thoughts, and the touch of brushstrokes leaves impressions both tactile and symbolic. He demonstrates with gentle humor the delicate art of reading and writing, emphasizing the importance of observation, of people, events, and the subtle currents that flow between them. Even at this age, Wu Zetian senses the weight of knowledge, and a quiet curiosity takes root. A minor event changes everything. One evening, as the sun sets behind the mountains, a festival fire ignites a nearby field, sending villagers scrambling. The sudden chaos contrasts with the calm she has known, and the girl watches intently as elders direct and organize, their voices steady amid the panic. This is her first encounter with unpredictability, with leadership arising in moments of crisis. It is thrilling, frightening, and illuminating all at once. In the night, the village settles again under a sky strewn with stars. Lanterns swing gently in the breeze, casting elongated shadows across the narrow streets. The flickering light illuminates faces that hold both relief and lingering fear, a reminder that life's calm can shift in an instant. Young Wu Zetian lies awake, the rhythm of distant drums from the festival mingling with the rustle of leaves outside her window. She begins to sense that even in seeming stillness, change is inevitable, and that those who observe carefully are often the ones who thrive. Thus ends the first chapter of her life, not with a grand declaration, but with a subtle awakening, a recognition of the interplay between order and chaos, observation and action. The mountains remain steadfast and silent, as if acknowledging the first stirrings of a mind that will one day command the vast currents of an empire. And as the village drifts into sleep, a single lantern guttering against the night wind hints at the salience and cunning that will soon begin to shape the path ahead. The festival night fades, and dawn returns to Lakdyung with its familiar blend of stillness and muted commotion. Mist curls through the alleys, clinging to wooden beams and tiled roofs, while temple bells murmur in the distance. Wu Zetian, now older, rises to the rhythm of this city of scholars, traders and pilgrims. The crisp bite of morning air carries both the fragrance of boiling millet porridge and the sharper scent of ink grinding on a scholar's desk. The world of her childhood, gentle lessons, fleeting play, gives way to the vast pull of something greater, the imperial court. The journey toward the palace is both literal and symbolic. Caravans crowd the dusty roads, merchants leading camels laden with silks that shimmer faintly beneath the morning sun. Monks walk in measured silence, prayer wheels spinning in their hands, while soldiers in lacquered armor stand rigid at crossroads, their eyes scanning the throngs. Among these figures moves Wu Zetian, her gaze keen, her steps deliberate. The capital seems alive, every sound and scent vibrating with unseen power. Could it be that the pulse of the empire itself is felt first through the senses, before it is grasped through knowledge? The first glimpse of the palace arrests her breath. High walls, layered with vermilion paint and gold leaf, rise against the horizon like a mountain built by human hands. Atop them, flags ripple lazily, embroidered with dragons whose scales catch the light. The gates themselves, massive and carved with intricate patterns, exhale the aroma of cedar and the faint metallic tang of the iron studs hammered deep into their surface. Within lies a world few can imagine, where the smallest gestures carry weight, and silence can speak louder than words. Life as a new attendant in the palace is a test of both endurance and perception. Each corridor whispers a different story, the soft swish of silk skirts against stone, the distant clatter of officials unrolling scrolls in council halls, the sharp laughter of senior consorts echoing in gardens perfumed by osmanthus. Wu Zetian moves through this world as both participant and observer, attuned to the shifting tides of favor and suspicion. Every meal, rice polished to gleam like pearls, dishes of pickled plum and steaming lamb stew, becomes a lesson in etiquette, how to serve, how to bow, how to let one's expression reveal neither hunger nor pride. Yet within this elegance lies strangeness, a quirky detail often overlooked. During formal banquets, entertainers balance plates on the tips of their swords or perform shadow puppetry with oil lamps casting shapes against silk screens. Even the clucking of exotic birds, caged in lacquered aviaries, is timed to delight guests. Wu Zetian learns that in this realm, performance is not limited to the stage. It infuses every act of life. Is it possible that the court itself is one great theatre, where the roles change, but the script remains timeless? Not all lessons come from spectacle. Behind the lacquered doors of servant quarters, whispers coil like smoke. The politics of women, subtle yet razor-edged, unfold in quiet exchanges. Who stands closest to the empress? Whose embroidery is praised? Whose silence is interpreted as arrogance? Wu Zetian watches and absorbs. She notices how even silence, when well placed, can elevate a person in others' eyes. Could it be that power often begins in the refusal to speak? The days blur into one another, the toll of bronze bells, the perfume of pine oil lamps, the brushing of ink across bamboo slips. Wu Zetian's mind grows sharper, her senses more disciplined. She learns the art of patience, the necessity of invisibility. Yet destiny refuses to let her remain unseen for long. One autumn evening, the emperor himself passes through the inner garden, his retinue scattering petals of chrysanthemum upon the path. The air is thick with incense, the faint buzz of cicadas lingering in the fading light. Wu Zetian, among others, bows low. But as she lifts her gaze, however briefly, the moment hangs suspended. The emperor's eyes meet hers, a fleeting recognition that startles her heart and tightens her breath. Could it be that this single glance sets into motion all that will follow? Lanterns sway in the garden's breeze. The shadows of pine trees stretch long across the tiled stones, and silence settles heavy, as if history itself holds its breath. Wu Zetian returns to her quarters that night unable to sleep, the emperor's image imprinted like ink upon silk. Something has shifted, subtle yet irreversible. And so, the curtain begins to rise. The stage of the palace no longer feels distant or forbidding. It begins to feel like a place where she might carve her name into the air itself. The world waits, hushed, for the next act. The air within the palace grows heavier with each passing season, as though the walls themselves absorb the whispers, the rivalries, the secret longings of those who move in silken silence. Wu Zetian, still young but no longer a mere attendant, finds herself drawn into the inner circles where decisions ripple outward to shape the lives of millions. Her days unfold beneath roofs glazed in emerald tiles, each morning marked by the clang of bronze bells, each evening sealed with the perfume of sandalwood drifting lazily from censers. Her first steps as a favored concubine are uncertain, yet vivid. At dawn, she enters the emperor's chamber, where the faint light filters through gauzy curtains, embroidered with golden cranes. The sound of a brush scratching across paper is the emperor himself, drafting poems, his calligraphy curling like mist upon the scroll. Wu Zetian sits quietly, her presence measured, her words few. She notices the emperor's fascination with fleeting things, the fall of a petal, the rhythm of a lute. Could it be that his attention, so elusive, is captured not by grandeur but by the smallest signs of restraint? The palace is a world of contrasts. In the mornings, Olem rituals, sacrifices at the ancestral shrine, offerings of rice and jade cups of wine poured into the earth. In the afternoons, softer pastimes, musicians plucking strings that reverberate like drops of rain, dancers moving with sleeves that swirl like drifting clouds. Wu Zetian learns to navigate both. She becomes a silent student of every gesture, every pause, every sudden shift in expression. And within her grows a question she does not yet dare to ask aloud. Is it possible that her path to survival lies not in submission, but in mastery? A curious fact lingers in these years. The emperor, like many rulers of the Tang, is enthralled by astrology. Each new moon, charts are drawn, stars traced, destinies whispered over silk scrolls. Wu Zetian listens carefully to these predictions, storing away not only their prophecies, but the ways they influence decisions. Could it be that fate is not only written in the heavens, but manipulated here on earth by those clever enough to interpret it? Evenings bring her closer to the emperor's side. They sit in gardens where moonlight casts the rocks in silver relief, the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine thick on the air. Servants pour warmed wine into cups of thin porcelain, so translucent it seems the liquid itself glows. The emperor speaks of poetry, of war, of his ancestors' triumphs. Wu Zetian responds with carefully chosen words, measured not only for their meaning but for their rhythm, their quiet strength. Slowly, a bond forms, not fiery, not obvious, but persistent, like the steady drip of water carving stone. The other women in the palace notice. Envy coils like a hidden serpent. Their glances sharpen, their whispers grow more barbed. A misplaced smile, a forgotten courtesy, a sleeve brushed too close to the emperor, any of these could ignite suspicion. Wu Zetian senses the eyes upon her. But rather than faltering, she learns to bend. She weaves her steps carefully, never too quick, never too bold, always leaving just enough mystery that others cannot pin her down. One night, an unusual scene unfolds. A performance is staged for the emperor, masked dancers reenacting the tale of a forgotten general. Their movements are sharp, almost violent, their shadows leaping high against torch-lit walls. The emperor laughs, applauds, delights. Wu Zetian, seated quietly, observes not only the story but the effect, the way art can sway a ruler's heart. She wonders, could it be that stories themselves hold more power than swords? As the months turn, the emperor summons her more often. She reads to him passages from ancient texts, her voice low, deliberate, steady. She composes small poems that drift like feathers across the still air. He begins to remember her words, to quote them, to echo her turns of phrase. Slowly, she enters not only his chamber but his mind. Yet within this ascendance lies danger. For every step upward, the ground grows less stable. One evening, as rain lashes against the palace eaves and thunder rumbles across the sky, Wu Zetian returns to her quarters to find a scrap of silk left anonymously on her table. Upon it, a warning inked in hurried strokes, "Beware the jealous, for envy wears 1,000 masks." She studies the words by the flickering lamplight, the thunder's growl echoing through her chest. The storm outside mirrors the storm within the palace. She lies awake, listening to the rain hammering the tiles, the scent of damp wood heavy in the air. Sleep does not come easily. For the first time, she feels the fragile balance between favor and ruin. And as dawn creeps pale across the courtyard, she understands. Her story has only begun. And the palace, beautiful as it seems, is also a labyrinth filled with unseen traps. The emperor's favor is a torch that burns brightly, but it casts shadows long and treacherous. Wu Zetian rises with the morning, the silk warning hidden away, her resolve deepening. The stage is set for a contest of wills that will test not only her cunning, but her very survival. The Tang Palace in those years was like a great tide, always shifting, always murmuring with unseen currents. In the bright daylight, the marble courts shimmered with ceremony, the clang of bronze gongs announcing rituals that bound emperor and heaven. But in the hidden galleries, where shadows stretched long beneath painted beams, quieter games unfolded, alliances whispered, betrayals sewn into embroidered smiles. Wu Zetian moved through these currents like a reed in the wind, bending yet never breaking. She had learned the art of watching without being noticed, of listening when silence was the safest armor. The emperor's favor grew, yet so did the hatred it summoned. A single glance, a nod, a murmur of laughter shared with him, all could ignite rivals whose families stretched back centuries, noble clans who believed their daughters had greater right to the throne of favor. One autumn, the palace air grew sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. A grand hu was declared. The emperor, restless beneath his silks, longed for the thrill of the chase. His retinue spilled beyond the palace gates, drums echoing across the fields, banners snapping like fire in the wind. Wu Zetian rode among them, her place not at the emperor's side, but close enough for all to see. The court ladies whispered, how bold, how dangerous, to show herself among soldiers and officials, where power smelled not of incense but of iron. The hunt itself became a spectacle of control. Riders surged across the plains, their horses kicking up a storm of dust. Falcons wheeled against the pale sky, their cries sharp, their wings slicing through the air. Wu Zetian, though not mounted with bow in hand, watched with steady gaze, her face calm even when a stag, antlers wide as a crown, burst from the thickets and thundered across the field. The emperor loosed an arrow that struck true, and the cheers of courtiers rang like bells. Yet in the rush of triumph, Wu Zetian's eyes were elsewhere. On the faces of the generals, on the measured smiles of the ministers, on the quiet exchanges that spoke of ambitions too deep for words. When the hunt ended, the spoils carried back in triumph, the palace feasted, gold cups of wine, platters of venison, music swelling from zithers and flutes. Amid the revelry, a poet recited verses comparing the emperor's shot to the divine strike of heaven's thunderbolt. Laughter rippled through the hall, but Wu Zetian caught something else, a pause, a shadow in the emperor's glance, as though he weighed not only his own skill, but how easily stories could immortalize an act. Was it possible, she wondered, that words would endure longer than any arrow? In the days that followed, she began to test this thought. Poems composed not for herself but for the emperor's ear, subtle lines woven with praise, yet threaded too with reminders of impermanence, of the need for vigilance, of the way rulers could be both adored and undone. Each time the emperor's gaze lingered longer. Each time his words echoed hers in council meetings. Slowly, her presence seeped beyond the private chambers, into the decisions that shaped armies, tax levies, and edicts written in dragon-headed brushstrokes. But her ascent came at cost. One evening, as the moon rose above the vermilion gates, she was summoned unexpectedly to the empress's apartments. The empress, robed in deep scarlet, her hair adorned with phoenix pins, received her not with warmth but with the frost of unspoken accusation. The air smelled faintly of bitter herbs, a perfume chosen not for sweetness but for severity. "You rise quickly," the empress said, her tone calm yet edged. "Too quickly, perhaps. Do you imagine the emperor's gaze will never waver?" Wu Zetian bowed deeply, her forehead nearly touching the polished floor. Her reply was soft, deferential, carefully shaped. His Majesty's favor is a gift of heaven. I am but a servant. The Empress's smile was thin, like a blade glim, sued in moonlight. Servants who shine too brightly are often extinguished. The words lingered, heavy as a curse. Wu Zetian left the chamber with her heart steady but her breath shallow, the warning echoing in her chest. She knew then that her struggle was no longer only for the Emperor's attention. It was for survival against the woman who already held the crown of authority. Outside, autumn deepened. Chrysanthemums bloomed in fiery gold across the courtyards, their petals curling like tongues of flame. The palace seemed drenched in beauty, yet beneath every painted surface danger lurked. Letters disappeared. Servants were bribed. Rumors flared like sparks in dry grass. Wu Zetian walked with measured steps, each breath a calculation. Could it be that her path forward demanded not only grace and wit, but also a fire fierce enough to consume those who threatened her? One night, as frost silvered the eaves and the river outside the city steamed with morning chill, she sat alone with her inkstone. Grinding the sticks slowly, the scent of pine soot rising in faint tendrils, she wrote a single line across the parchment. Power is a shadow. Only those who understand its source may hold it. The words stared back at her, stark and cold. She blew on the ink to dry it, then rolled the parchment tight, tucking it into a hidden chest. Beyond her chamber walls, a distant gong marked the hour. Sleep eluded her. She lay awake, the silence pressing down like snow, knowing the storm to come would test her in ways neither poems nor grace could shield. For now she had survived. But the palace was not finished with her, and somewhere beyond the silence, a reckoning gathered, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. Winter came early to Chang'an that year. The winds swept across the palace walls with a low, mournful moan, rattling bronze wind chimes until they sounded like whispers of old ghosts. The great halls, usually fragrant with sandalwood smoke and warmed by heavy braziers, felt colder than usual, for an invisible frost hung in the air, something not of weather but of suspicion. The Empress had grown sharper in her glances, slower in her smiles. Her attendants moved like shadows, their eyes quick to catch any misstep. Wu Zetian, meanwhile, moved with equal caution, her silk shoes treading softly as though each step might awaken some hidden snare. She was still favored, still called into the Emperor's chambers when the court's torches burned low and the city outside fell silent, but she could feel the weight of other gazes on her back. During the New Year festival, when lanterns painted the night with rivers of red light, the Emperor appeared before the court in full regalia. The golden drag, on crown, shimmered against the blaze of torches, and his voice carried strong as he announced blessings for the realm. But even amid the celebration, an undercurrent tugged beneath the surface. The Empress sat at his side, her face carved in composure, while Wu Zetian stood behind, a single jewel in her hair glinting as though it pulsed with warning. It was during this festival that a dramatic omen was said to appear. A comet tore across the night sky, its tail long, its light uncanny. The crowd gasped, and the Emperor stiffened, for such signs were always interpreted as heaven's disapproval or heaven's shifting will. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was the dynasty in danger? Was someone destined to rise where others would fall? Historians still argue whether the comet truly appeared that year, or whether later storytellers embroidered the tale to give cosmic weight to the intrigue of the palace. What is certain is that the omen deepened unease. Ministers argued in hushed tones. Monks from distant temples were summoned, their chants reverberating through the corridors at midnight, trying to calm heaven's fury. Wu Zetian listened, her heart tightening, for she knew omens were weapons in themselves. The Empress would surely claim that the heavens warned against those who overstepped their station. Soon after, accusations began to murmur. A courtier claimed to have seen Wu Zetian bribe a servant. Another whispered that charms and spells had been found in her chambers, small talismans meant to summon favor or curse rivals. These were not yet charges, only murmurs, but in the palace murmurs were arrows aimed at the heart. Could it be that the Empress herself planted them, feeding the court a feast of suspicion to devour her rival? In those days, Wu Zetian's nights were long and restless. She lay beneath embroidered quilts, heavy with stitched phoenixes, listening to the faint drip of water outside, the occasional cry of a night bird. Her mind raced with calculations. Who could be trusted? Who could betray? How to endure the rising storm? She was young still, yet her survival demanded the cunning of someone far older. One evening, when the palace seemed hushed beneath fresh snow, the emperor himself arrived unannounced. His robes carried the scent of winter wind, and his eyes were weary, though lit with a spark of restlessness. He spoke to Wu Zetian not of politics, not of omens, but of dreams. Dreams of ruling in peace, of bringing stability to a court forever fractured by old clans and hungry families. His voice trembled with frustration, with the exhaustion of wearing heaven's mandate like a weight of stone. Wu Zetian listened. Her words came softly, a balance of comfort and daring. She reminded him that peace required vigilance, that heaven's mandate was not a gift but a test, and that even comets could be reinterpreted, not as warnings, but as signs of renewal. Her voice, slow and steady, wrapped around his turmoil like silk. Perhaps it was in that moment that the emperor saw not only a consort, but something more dangerous, a mind that could shape his thoughts, a presence that could steady or sway the empire itself. Historians debate whether his reliance on her began here, or if it had always been so. But the records grow sharper after this winter, noting her influence, her counsel, her presence beside him not only in chambers of leisure, but in the halls of governance. Still, danger pressed closer. The empress's patience frayed, her voice colder, her movements calculated like the measured strokes of a calligraphy brush dipped in ink too black to fade. She began gathering allies, whispering to ministers, weaving a net of loyalty among those who despised the new favorite. The tension reached its peak one night when a servant was discovered dead near the lotus pond, his body stiff in the frost. Some claimed it was illness, others whispered poison. Still others insisted it was a message. Wu Zetian stood at her chamber's threshold, watching guards carry the body away, the lantern light flickering across their grim faces. She felt the chills seep into her bones. The palace was no longer merely a place of splendor. It was a crucible, testing every soul within it. Wu Zetian knew that her survival, her future, perhaps even the empire's course, would depend on choices soon to be made. And as the torches dimmed, as the shadows deepened across the painted walls, the next step of her path loomed before her, sharp as a blade, uncertain as the stars above. The night ended with silence, but it was the kind of silence that arrives before thunder. Something had been set in motion. The first buds of spring appeared timidly in Chang'an, pushing through the thawed earth like pale jade spears. Yet inside the palace walls, the season's promise of renewal felt more like a tightening knot. Rumors had grown louder, like drums muffled behind a silk screen, until they could no longer be ignored. The empress had made her move. Courtiers began to circulate petitions, their brushstrokes precise, but their words venomous. They accused Wu Zetian of sorcery, of seducing the emperor beyond reason, of scheming to eclipse her rightful mistress. These accusations were hardly new in the annals of court intrigue, but in the Tang court they carried weight. Sorcery was treason. Sorcery meant exile or worse. On one particularly heavy afternoon, the court convened. Ministers lined the great hall in their flowing robes, each embroidered sleeve whispering as they bowed. The emperor sat at the center, his crown heavy with golden dragons, his gaze unreadable. To his left, the empress radiated righteous calm, her hands folded neatly, her eyes flashing only once, briefly, when Wu Zetian entered. Wu Zetian bowed, her forehead nearly grazing the cool stone. She rose slowly, her gaze lowered in deference, but within her chest, her heartbeat pounded like the temple's ceremonial drum. She spoke little, only enough to deny the charges, her woe. Ardi's clipped yet soft. But in her silence she crafted power. Where others filled the hall with noise, she let stillness press against them, forcing the court to look harder, listen deeper. It was then, some chronicles suggest, that the emperor spoke in her defense. He dismissed the accusations as jealousy, noting her devotion, her intelligence, her loyalty. Yet even as he spoke, others muttered behind their sleeves. Historians still argue whether this moment was a triumph or a dangerous reprieve. Did his defense secure her position, or did it mark her more clearly as a target? A curious detail lingers in the records. That same week, a shrine to the bodhisattva Guan Yin was quietly erected near her quarters. It was simple at first, only a carved statue and a handful of incense sticks, but it grew into a sanctuary of whispers. Some said Wu Zetian herself prayed there nightly, seeking guidance. Others believed she cultivated the shrine deliberately, weaving her image into the threads of Divi, the compassion. Could it be that the woman accused of sorcery was instead crafting a reputation as heaven's chosen devotee? Outside the palace, the city pulsed with life. Street vendors hawked steaming buns, scholars carried scrolls through crowded lanes, and poets gathered at wine shops, scribbling verses about blossoms falling like regret. Yet even there the name Wu Zetian was muttered, half in awe, half in fear. Ordinary citizens sensed that something unusual was stirring, though they could not see its full shape. Back within the palace, tension hardened further when one of the Empress's trusted ladies-in-waiting fell ill. She claimed to have been cursed, her body racked with unexplained fevers. The Empress pointed, subtly but surely, toward her rival. Wu Zetian, of course, denied it, but the shadow of doubt lingered. And then, just as the storm seemed ready to break, a dramatic turn arrived. The Empress herself stumbled, her health faltering. She appeared in court pale, her voice thinner, her strength weakened. Some whispered divine punishment, others whispered poison. Historians have never agreed. Was it mere illness, or had Wu Zetian already begun her long, subtle game of attrition? As spring deepened, so too did the fractures in the imperial household. Each dinner, each festival, each ceremony was a theatre of silent duels, glances sharp as blades, smiles stretched thin as rice paper. Wu Zetian walked these halls like a dancer on a rope, each step deliberate, each breath measured. But the balance could not last forever. The Empress, weakened yet unbroken, summoned her allies. A plot was whispered in secret chambers, a plan that might finally rid the court of the woman she despised. And though the air smelled of blossoms and rain, something darker lingered beneath the petals. One evening, the Emperor retired later than usual. He spoke little, his brow furrowed, his wine untouched. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, shaking the paper lanterns as though the heavens themselves leaned closer. Wu Zetian knelt nearby, her candle casting a steady glow across her face. She waited, patient as always, but within her a storm matched the skies. And just as the candle sputtered low, a messenger burst into the hall, his robes soaked with rain, his voice urgent. A discovery had been made in the Empress's own quarters, something strange, something that could change everything. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. The Empress's lips parted in disbelief, and Wu Zetian, silent and still, felt the world tilt. The balance was about to break. The storm from that night lingered in memory long after the thunder had faded. It was not the rain that unsettled the court, nor even the lightning that rattled the bronze bells in the palace corridors, but the discovery in the Empress's own quarters, a discovery that carried the weight of accusation turned back upon itself. The messenger, breathless and dripping with rain, laid out strange objects seized from her chambers. A bundle of talismans inked in red, a small effigy carved crudely from wood, and a set of silk threads knotted in the shapes of binding charms. Whether these were real instruments of sorcery or merely planted evidence, no one could say, but their appearance was enough to twist suspicion. The same charges, once levelled against Wu Zetian, now hung over the Empress herself. The court erupted in a low roar, like caged animals testing their bars. Ministers exchanged glances, some feigning outrage, others concealing poorly masked satisfaction. Could it be that fate itself had intervened? Or had Wu Zetian, silent and calculating, already begun to weave her invisible net? Historians still argue whether the discovery was genuine or staged, whether the Empress fell victim to divine irony or human cunning. The Emperor, pale from wine and weariness, looked upon his Empress with troubled eyes. Once, she had been the symbol of his authority, his anchor in turbulent waters. Now she appeared diminish, shrouded in doubt, her protests ringing hollow in the echoing hall. Wu Zetian did not speak. She stood in her place, her gaze lowered, her presence steady. Her silence was louder than any accusation. Yet even as the Empress faltered, Wu Zetian did not immediately rise triumphant. Her nights were still filled with whispers, her every step shadowed by rivals who feared her ascent. She began to retreat often to her Guanyin shrine, where the incense smoke curled like question marks into the rafters. Some said she prayed for guidance, others claimed she rehearsed her performance of piety, shaping herself as the chosen vessel of compassion. The truth, perhaps, was both. Outside the palace, life swelled with spring's abundance. Farmers returned to their fields, the smell of wet earth mingling with green shoots. Merchants in Chang'an's East Market sold bolts of silk dyed in brilliant hues, while entertainers filled taverns with music that spilled onto lantern-lit streets. But beneath the city's rhythm, rumors spread as swiftly as river currents. The Empress had fallen from grace, and in her place rose another woman, bold as a hawk, patient as a serpent. One evening, during a quiet court banquet, the Empress appeared again. She sat, rigid, her smile brittle, her jeweled hairpins trembling slightly with every motion. Across from her, Wu Zetian poured tea for the Emperor, her movements graceful, her robe's long sleeves whispering like flowing water. For the briefest moment their eyes met. The Empress's gaze burned with fury and fear, while Wu Zetian's held the calm of a lantern flame, steady, unwavering, consuming only what it must. It was in this moment, some chroniclers claim, that the Emperor's decision crystallized. The Empress would be deposed. Her name would be stripped from ritual offerings, her seat left vacant. A shadow lifted from Wu Zetian, though not without cost. She had gained space to move, but now every eye would fix upon her more sharply. But victory car. It faced its own dangers. New rivals emerged, scholars wary of her influence, generals who distrusted her ambitions, ministers who murmured that a concubine's hand should never touch the levers of power. The palace itself seemed alive with suspicion. Courtyards echoed with footsteps even in the night, and whispers followed Wu Zetian through every carved gate and corridor. One night, while the moon hung full and cold above the palace roofs, Wu Zetian lingered in the imperial library. Scrolls lay open before her, their ink glistening faintly in candlelight. She read of past dynasties, of rulers who rose and fell, of queens who had been honored and forgotten. She studied these words as if they were both warnings and blueprints. Could it be that she already foresaw her path, long before others dared imagine it? Yet even as she traced the strokes of history, the echo of footsteps approached. A messenger bowed low, his shadow stretching across the scrolls. His message was simple but heavy with consequence. The Emperor had summoned her to discuss matters of state, not just domestic duties, not merely the care of children or temple offerings, but state. For the first time, Wu Zetian would step into a space once reserved only for emperors, generals, and the highest ministers. A door had opened. Whether it was a blessing or a trap remained uncertain. And as she followed the messenger into the long, lantern-lit corridors, the air grew dense with possibility. Behind her, the abandoned scrolls whispered with the wisdom of the past. Ahead, the court awaited, its silence sharp as unsheathed steel. Something irreversible was about to begin. The lanterns of Chang'an Palace burned low that night, their glow softened by veils of smoke from pine torches. In the great hall, silence pooled like still water, disturbed only by the rustle of brocade robes as ministers shifted uneasily in their places. The Emperor sat at the center, eyes heavy with fatigue, while a single figure entered slowly from the shadows. Wu Zetian. This was not her first time in the hall, yet it was the first time she was invited to sit beside him, not behind a curtain or waiting in an antechamber. Her robe trailed across the polished tiles, embroidered cranes seeming to lift in the dim light, wings poised mid-flight. The ministers lowered their eyes. Though many clenched their jaws, this was no ordinary summons. A woman seated where only the highest ministers belonged unsettled the fragile order of their world. The Emperor spoke, his voice measured, each word deliberate. Matters of state weighed heavily. Border skirmishes in the north, famine threatening PR, provinces along the Yellow River, and debates over tax levies for the great canal works. Normally, such matters would have been confined to councils of men hardened by years of bureaucracy. Yet now, with the faintest tremor of intrigue, he asked Wu Zetian's opinion. Her reply came calm, almost unhurried, but beneath its serenity was an undercurrent of precision. She suggested diverting resources not only to defense but to granaries, pointing out that a hungry population is more dangerous than distant enemies. She advised careful watch over generals, lest their ambitions grow faster than their loyalty. She even proposed strengthening ties with Buddhist monasteries, knowing their influence stretched beyond temple walls into the hearts of common people. Historians still argue whether the emperor sought her counsel out of genuine respect, or whether he simply delighted in shocking his ministers. But the effect was unmistakable. Wu Zetian's voice, soft as a reed flute, now wove itself into the music of governance. Outside the palace, the city swelled with gossip. Scholars in tea-houses murmured of a woman whose words guided the throne. Courtesans at banquets whispered of her wit, her beauty, her composure. Merchants along the Silk Road carried rumors as readily as they carried bolts of brocade, that the Tang Dynasty's future was being shaped not only by an emperor, but by the concubine who prayed nightly before Guanyin. Could it be that the balance of heaven itself tilted toward her? But every step forward carried peril. Ministers plotted in side chambers, their brushstrokes furious on hidden petitions. Some accused her of arrogance, others of undermining the sacred hierarchy. Even the people of Chang'an, though fascinated, wondered if such boldness disturbed the natural order. Wu Zetian knew this. She moved carefully, her every gesture wrapped in humility, her words cloaked in reverence. Yet behind the mask she watched, calculated, and remembered. At night she returned to the imperial library, where scrolls spread before her like stars across a dark sky. She read of past queens who had dared to influence politics, of the Empress Lu of Han, whose shadow had stretched across a dynasty. Could these histories have whispered encouragement or warnings as she traced the characters with steady fingers? The emperor, meanwhile, grew increasingly dependent on her counsel. His health wavered, his energy often drained by courtly demands. Wu Zetian's presence was like a steady flame in his unsteady night, warm, unwavering, patient. Ministers who once spoke freely now held their tongues, knowing her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, noticed every hesitation. One evening, as the emperor dozed, Wu Zetian lingered in the council chamber. She stood beneath the great painted map of the empire, candles flickering across rivers and mountains inked in careful detail. Her gaze lingered not on the borders, but on the heartlands, the villages, the canals, the fields where millions lived. Ived and toiled. Was she imagining herself not merely as a companion to power, but as its wielder? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a cough. A minister had lingered in the shadows, watching, his face pale, his eyes calculating. He bowed, too low, and retreated into darkness. A warning. She was never unobserved, yet even warnings could not halt the tide. The emperor began to restructure ceremonies, allowing Wu Zetian to stand nearer the throne, to oversee rituals once managed only by the empress. Each appearance chipped away at tradition, each word spoken in council carved deeper into the fabric of governance. And then came the moment that shifted perception entirely. During a dispute over military grain shipments, a minister raised his voice against her, denouncing the idea that a woman could meddle in affairs of the realm. The emperor, weary but firm, silenced him, not with anger but with a simple command. Listen to her. The hall fell silent. Even the crackle of torch seemed to pause. It was a phrase that echoed far beyond the chamber. Listen to her. And as Wu Zetian bowed, concealing the glimmer in her eyes, the candle flames bent in the draught of the hall. Somewhere, beyond the palace walls, spring winds carried cherry blossoms into the darkened streets of Chang'an, petals falling like omens on wet stone. For those who feared her, the message was clear. She was no longer merely a favored concubine. She was a voice the empire must heed. The spring rains came to Chang'an like a slow drumbeat upon the tiled roofs, soaking gardens where peonies bowed under the weight of water, their petals bruised yet still fragrant. The palace courtyards glistened, pathways darkened by rain, as eunuchs hurried with oil paper umbrellas. Beneath the sound of dripping eaves, whispers multiplied. The emperor's health was failing. His once commanding voice grew faint, his steps hesitant. In the chambers of the harem, fear and anticipation tangled like ivy. Fear of uncertainty. Anticipation of change. The official empress, long estranged from his affections, sought allies among the ministers, yet her influence was brittle, hollowed by years of neglect. By contrast, Wu Zetian's presence deepened like ink spreading through water. She was no longer an ornament, but a necessity, and necessity breeds both loyalty and hatred. Each day she visited the emperor's side, her touch cooling his fevered brow, her words steadying his restless thoughts. Physicians brought bitter decoctions, incense curled in pale smoke, and Buddhist sutras were recited in quiet rhythm. But in the stillness of night, as rain tapped against the lattice windows, Wu Zetian remained wakeful, gazing at the dim flame of the lamp. Was it compassion that bound her to his side, or calculation? Or perhaps both, entwined inseparably? Outside these chambers, tension sharpened. Ministers muttered of impropriety. Confucian scholars, rigid in their devotion to ancestral order, condemned the disruption of harmony. A woman guiding the throne was an omen of chaos. Yet others, governors, generals, and even merchants, began to sense that aligning with her might secure futures that tradition alone could not. Could it be that power itself was shifting, as if heaven weighed the scales anew? Then came the thunderclap. A scandal broke like a storm over the court, accusations that the official empress had poisoned food intended for Wu Zetian's children. Some said it was rumor, others swore it was truth. The palace became a battlefield of glances, letters, and hidden blades. When Wu Zetian's infant daughter died under mysterious circumstances, grief mingled with suspicion, until sorrow itself became an instrument of power. Historians debate endlessly. Did Wu Zetian herself weave the net of accusation, or was she truly the victim of palace rivalry? The truth may forever remain cloaked in the shadows of silken curtains. Yet what is certain is this: the emperor turned his wrath against his empress, deposing her, casting her aside with the finality of thunder scattering clouds, and in the space left empty, Wu Zetian ascended. Not yet to the throne, not yet as empress in name, but as the woman who would share his crown more closely than any before. Ceremonies followed. Gold-threaded robes draped her shoulders, jade ornaments gleamed in her hair. Musicians played solemn tunes as courtiers bowed, some willingly, others choking on their pride. The hall resounded with the proclamation: Wu Zetian, now formally elevated, seated as the true consort of the emperor. But triumph is never pure. Beneath the surface lay the coals of resentment. Families of disgraced officials plotted revenge. Eunuchs carried secret messages folded into fans. Monks in distant monasteries debated whether heaven favored her rise or marked the beginning of decline. Wu Zetian herself walked a narrow bridge between awe and enmity. She prayed to Guan Yin with genuine devotion, lighting lamps whose flames quivered into her night, as though heaven itself hesitated. Yet in her private study, scrolls lay open to annals of past dynasties. She read of Empress Lu of Han, who wielded regency after her husband's death, ruling with an iron hand. Did Wu Zetian wonder if destiny, like a wheel, now turned toward her with irresistible momentum? One evening, a storm struck Chang'an, lightning splitting the sky as though heaven itself scribbled jagged characters upon the clouds. Wu Zetian stood before a bronze mirror, her face illuminated by sudden flashes. Behind her reflection hovered both triumph and danger. The sound of thunder rolled over the palace, and she whispered words too soft for record, a vow only the mirror and the storm might recall. At that same hour, deep within the corridors of the court, a scribe recorded a petition, accusing her of overreach, of corrupting the emperor's judgment. The brushstrokes trembled, ink splattering like rain, for even the scribe feared what writing her name might summon. And so, with each beat of rain against the roof, her position grew firmer, yet the circle of enemies thickened like storm clouds around a mountain peak. Was this merely the next chapter of her ascent, or the beginning of a trial that would decide whether history remembered her as savior or as usurper? The rain did not answer. It only fell, steady, endless, whispering against the darkened earth. The air in Chang'an grew heavy with summer heat, the kind that pressed against the skin and carried the smell of dust, incense, and sweat through the corridors of the palace. The emperor's breath came weaker now, shallow like a reed flute played by a tired hand. Servants whispered that he no longer dreamed of battlefields or poetry, but of release, of rivers and quiet gardens. Beside him, Wu Zetian's presence was unbroken. She oversaw the turning of his pillows, the preparation of his meals, the rhythm of the court's visits. Ministers entered with bowed heads, leaving their words on silk scrolls. Hat she would read before his tired eyes could manage. Soon those scrolls stopped reaching him altogether. Answers were whispered into her ear, decisions drafted by her hand. And yet, nothing was declared. Not yet. The court was like a lantern lit in daylight, its flame hidden, its brightness waiting for night. Beyond the palace walls, the empire stretched wide. Caravans moved along the Silk Road, bringing lapis and musk, glass and silk. Soldiers guarded the borders where Turks rode restless on the steppes. In the temples of Luoyang and Chang'an, monks debated sutras as the scent of sandalwood filled vast halls. But at the heart of it all, inside the palace chambers, lay a single truth. The emperor's strength was fading, and a woman's hand held the balance. Historians still argue whether she truly loved him in those final days, or whether her devotion was only another mask of power. Could it be that both were true? She had once been his concubine, dismissed, sent to the convent, and then recalled. Now she was his shadow, his guide, his voice. Love and strategy had become so interwoven that even the most skilled historian cannot unravel them cleanly. Then the night came when the emperor closed his eyes and did not open them again. The palace bells tolled low, their sound carrying across the city. Officials fell to their knees, some genuinely mourning, others calculating the angle of their next step. The Emperor of Tang had passed, and his chosen heir, the Crown Prince Gaozong, was to take the throne. But Gaozong was frail, plagued by ailments of the body and indecision of the mind. His reign might have been short-lived, overshadowed by the will of his ministers, had not Wu Zetian stood beside him. As the morning rituals unfolded, white banners hung, drums beat in solemn cadence, incense curled into the dim sky. It was already clear that she was not retreating into the shadows. Instead, she stood in the hall of mourning, her robes black as ink, her gaze steady, and all the courtiers saw that this was no ordinary widow of a departed emperor. Whispers became declarations. Wu Zetian was now empress consort, beside Gaozong, ruling in name as his partner. Yet more than ceremony lingered in the air. At councils, when Gaozong faltered, she spoke. When documents required signatures, her brush guided his hand. Some ministers protested, citing the rights of the ancestors, but others, sensing the tide, bent low, their loyalty sliding like silk toward her rising star. A curious scene unfolded one morning. A falcon, released from its hood, soared above the palace grounds, circling once before landing directly at Wu Zetian's feet. The courtiers gasped. Was this an omen, heaven's approval of her rise, or a warning that a predator had claimed the palace as its perch? She smiled faintly, stroked the bird's feathers and let it fly again. Still, danger pulsed beneath the surface. Gaozong's sisters whispered their opposition. Confucian scholars drafted memorials denouncing her interference. And in hidden chambers, exiled members of the former empress's clan sharpened their knives, vowing that a concubine turned nun turned empress would not rewrite the order of heaven. But order, like stone carved by water, was already shifting. Late one evening, as Gaozong struggled with a sudden wave of dizziness collapsing into her arms, she ordered physicians, commanded the chamberlain, and steadied the empire in one breath. In the wavering lamplight she sat beside him, holding his pulse, her face calm yet unreadable. Was this the moment she realized that his reign would not be his alone, that heaven's decree might in truth be bending toward her? In the silence of that night, while outside cicadas sang in ceaseless rhythm, The palace seemed to exhale. A dynasty had lost one emperor, gained another, and within its core, Wu Zetian was no longer merely a consort. She was becoming the axis around which the empire turned, and as the court drifted uneasily into the future, questions sharpened like shadows at dusk. Would she guide the throne with mercy, or seize it with iron? Was she shaping destiny, or was destiny shaping her? The cicadas did not answer. Their chorus only grew louder, as if echoing the restlessness of the empire itself. The days following Gaozong's coronation unfolded in measured ceremony. Drums announced decrees, court scribes inked edicts, and the banners of Tang fluttered against the late summer sky. Yet beneath the grandeur, the tension of new rules spread like ripples through a pond. Gaozong, delicate in health, moved cautiously, often leaning on attendants as he climbed the steps to the throne hall. Each motion revealed what courtiers already whispered. The emperor was present in body, but the voice that shaped policy came often from the woman seated just behind the curtain. Wu Zetian's presence in those early councils was subtle yet unmistakable. She did not sit openly beside the throne, custom forbade it, but a silken screen separated her from the ministers, and through its lattice her words slipped forth. One minister would propose, another would object, and then her voice, even and deliberate, would conclude. Gaozong nodded, signed, and the decision was done. It was said that even the rhythm of birdsong in the imperial gardens seemed to follow her measured tone. Still, resistance brewed. Confucian officials, bound to the teachings of ritual and hierarchy, drafted long scrolls decrying her influence. A woman, they argued, might advise in private but should never command the affairs of state. They invoked ancient examples, widowed queens who guided their sons but never ruled their husbands. Was not the balance of yin and yang threatened by this arrangement? Yet Gaozong, perhaps out of affection, perhaps out of weakness, dismissed these objections. "The Empress," he declared, "is a mirror to my sight. Without her, I see only half the picture." Historians still debate whether this statement reflected love, reliance, or surrender. Could it be all three, bound together by circumstance? Beyond the palace gates, the empire stirred. Tax levies burdened farmers in the south. Soldiers held uneasy peace along the Korean peninsula. Months from India arrived with new scrolls, thick with debate over the nature of emptiness, and always caravans rattled in from Central Asia, carrying carpets, pomegranates, and rumors. Among those rumors, some whispered of Wu Zetian herself, a woman of unusual destiny, one who might yet defy the celestial order. Within the palace, her authority spread quietly into daily life. She reorganized the inner court, dismissing those whose loyalty wavered and promoting attendants who proved sharp-eyed and discreet. Eunuchs loyal to her were placed near the emperor. Ladies-in-waiting carried her words into the outer halls. One night, a palace servant found a slip of silk tucked beneath the emperor's pillow, bearing only a verse. "The phoenix shares its perch, yet the dragon tires." The meaning was clear enough. Quirky stories circulated too. It was said she kept a small collection of mechanical birds, clever contraptions of bronze and feathers that could flap and sing when wound with hidden springs. Ministers, invited to view them, would marvel at murmur of omens. Were these not symbols of harmony between artifice and nature, between woman and throne? Others scoffed. Surely they were toys, but even toys in her hands could become instruments of persuasion. By the second year of Gaozong's reign, the ministers had accepted the inevitable. The empress was their second sovereign. Some resisted still, whispering in corridors, but more bowed lower than before, knowing which way the wind carried incense smoke. Yet ambition, once fed, rarely sleeps. As Gaozong's illnesses grew more frequent, sudden blindness, dizzy spells, weakness of the limbs, Wu Zetian's hand pressed more firmly against the levers of empire, and so the stage was set for the next turning. One evening, as the court prepared to deliberate the matter of succession, Gaozong collapsed mid-sentence, his words scattering like dropped pearls across the polished floor. Gasps filled the chamber. Ministers rushed forward. Wu Zetian, calm amid the uproar, rose from behind the curtain. Her gaze swept across them all, unhurried, unwavering. "The Emperor will recover," she said, her voice quiet yet commanding. "Until then, his will shall pass through me." The hall fell silent. No minister dared object. The curtain between woman and throne was no longer just silk. It had become the true seat of power. And as the torches burned low, their flames bending in draughts of hidden wind, the question hovered unspoken. If Gaozong's body failed again, would that curtain even remain? Or would Wu Zetian step out, openly, into the dragon's seat itself? Autumn arrived quietly, carrying with it a haze of mist and the scent of fallen leaves, curling like whispered secrets along the palace walkways. The trees in the imperial gardens shimmered with gold and crimson, their branches bowing beneath the gentle weight of frost-kissed air. Within the palace walls, the mood was tense yet hushed, as if the seasons themselves waited for the next move in a game only the Emperor and Wu Zetian understood. Gaozong's health declined with the subtlety of shadow lengthening through the hallways. One day he could walk unaided, his robe brushing the marble tiles. The next, he required the careful support of attendants. The ministers fretted over state affairs, but their concerns were now secondary, drowned beneath the quiet authority that emanated from the Empress. Wu Zetian walked the halls like a soft wind, unseen yet shaping every movement, guiding decisions with a steady hand. The courtiers watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. They whispered of her intelligence, her ability to remember every detail of law, grain shipments, and military postings, even as she attended prayers and oversaw palace ceremonies. Some compared her to the legendary Empress Lu, others to the Phoenix, both a creature of fire and a symbol of rebirth. Could it be that history had indeed prepared a role for her no one dared predict? Wu Zetian's influence extended into rituals once strictly controlled. By Gaozong. During ceremonial readings, she subtly altered the order of offerings. She suggested subtle shifts in procession routes, giving preference to officials loyal to her while keeping dissenters at a distance. Each alteration was slight, almost imperceptible, yet collectively, the court began to feel a new gravity in her presence. Even in private, her intelligence was relentless. She reviewed petitions in dimly lit chambers, quill poised over scrolls, her mind mapping out alliances, identifying rivals, and noting who had the courage, or the weakness, to oppose her. Outside, the city moved in its rhythms. Markets overflowing with rice and silk, street performers singing for coins, children chasing kites along the riverbanks. Yet in these ordinary streets, tales of Wu Zetian's growing power had already begun to travel. One evening, a council convened to discuss the succession. Ministers murmured over Gaozong's heir, but the emperor's failing strength meant that their deliberations were guided more by the empress than by imperial decree. She spoke little, choosing each word as though selecting gemstones, measuring their weight against consequence. By the end of the night, decisions had been made that would shape the dynasty for decades, yet no one credited her openly. Her influence remained a shadow, both undeniable and invisible. There were lighter, curious moments amid this slow consolidation of power. It was said that Wu Zetian enjoyed testing the palace animals, tame cranes, ducks, even mechanical birds, watching their reactions, noting patterns, finding lessons in observation. Ministers joked quietly that she understood both the human heart and the winged heart of creatures alike. Still, danger lingered. Families of deposed officials sent secret messages plotting revenge. Scholars debated the propriety of a woman guiding the empire. And from distant provinces, reports arrived of unrest, tax disputes, and rebellious governors. Each report required her attention. Ion, her judgment, her subtle guidance of the emperor's commands. As winter approached, a frost settled over the palace gardens. Wu Zetian watched it from a veranda, her hands folded over the hem of her robe. The world seemed paused, every breath a whisper of potential, every falling leaf a question. The court, the city, and even the distant borders waited, unaware that the shape of power was already shifting. And in the silence of that frost-laden night, a single realization crystallized. The emperor's strength would not last forever. When he faltered entirely, The empire would no longer need only his voice, it would need hers. The first threads of destiny stretched taut, ready to bear the weight of the coming change. Winter crept into Chang'an with quiet insistence, covering the palace rooftops with frost that sparkled like powdered jade in the morning light. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of burning pine and boiling medicinal herbs, mingling with the faint aroma of roasted charge.
Chestnuts sold in the streets beyond the gates. Inside the palace, corridors echoed with the soft click of embroidered slippers across polished marble, while lanterns flickered against walls adorned with dragons and phoenixes, symbols of imperial continuity. Gaozong's condition had worsened. Days passed with him pale and weak, his voice barely above a whisper. Ministers, accustomed to wielding authority through his presence, now deferred entirely to Wu Zetian. She moved among them as a tide of quiet command, her gestures minimal but precise, her words like carefully measured stones thrown into still water, each ripple altering the shape of events in subtle, undeniable ways. Her influence was no longer hidden. Decisions once debated at length now bore the clarity of her hand. Provinces received directives. Taxes were adjusted. Military movements executed without hesitation. Those who opposed her, subtly or openly, found themselves sidelined, their petitions ignored or redirected. Even in the emperor's presence, ministers began to consult her first, aware that her insight had become inseparable from the decisions of the throne. And yet she remained observant, cautious. Wu Zetian knew that absolute power was a precarious jewel, beautiful yet fragile. She maintained her rituals, visiting Guanyin shrines, listening to sutras, walking among the palace gardens at dawn. Scholars still debate whether these practices were genuine devotion, psychological preparation, or strategic display. Could it be all three, intertwined like silk threads in a tapestry? Amid this consolidation of influence, Wu Zetian faced personal sorrow. Memories of children lost, of betrayals survived, haunted her quiet moments. One evening, she lingered by a window, watching snowflakes drift over the inner courtyards. Each flake seemed to fall with measured intent, and in their delicate descent, she found both reflection and resolve. Her gaze rested on the distant horizon, imagining an empire shaped by her. Her vision, her subtle authority, guiding every corner of the Tang Dynasty.
Outside, life continued in contrasts. Street vendors wrapped scarves around their throats, farmers carried firewood home along slippery paths, and the hum of the Silk Road persisted despite frost. News of palace affairs filtered slowly beyond the gates, painting Wu Zetian as both guardian and enigma. A mechanical bird flapped its bronze wings in her chambers, the soft click of gears marking time, as if even her toys acknowledged the passage of destiny. The court, however, was far from peaceful. Old rivals conspired in shadows, writing memorials to accuse her of overreach, whispering of unnatural influence. Eunuchs loyal to her ensured the messages reached her without delay. With each report she made subtle adjustments, realigning alliances and subtly undermining those who sought to obstruct her. Then came the pivotal moment. Gaozong's health deteriorated to the point that he could no longer perform imperial duty.
The emperor, once the axis of the Tang Dynasty, became dependent entirely on Wu Zetian's guidance. Ministers bowed, courtiers whispered, and a hush settled over the palace. In the quiet chambers, she took the reins fully, preparing the empire not merely to function, but to be guided under her direction. The threshold of overt power was near, the final ascent had begun, and as snow swirled around the palace roofs, falling softly onto carved stone dragons, one thought settled like frost on the mind of history. The woman who had survived exile, intrigue, and whispered threats was about to step completely into the role destiny had long hinted she would assume. The palace lay in a hushed reverence, beneath heavy winter skies, the courtyards glazed with ice, reflecting lantern light like fractured stars. Wu Zetian walked slowly along the corridors, her silk robes rustling softly, a sound almost drowned by the occasional crack of frost-laden tiles under the eunuch's feet. Even in the silence her presence was felt. Each step, each glance, carried the weight of authority unspoken, but unmistakable. Gaozong's illness had reached a critical point. He remained in the inner chambers,
a shadow of his former vigor, dependent entirely on those around him. Ministers whispered in anxious groups, balancing caution and ambition. Some feared the shift in power, others anticipated it with careful excitement. Yet all eyes, eventually, returned to the Empress, whose subtle gestures guided the rhythm of governance. Her influence now permeated every level of court life. Ceremonial arrangements were subtly adjusted to favor her supporters. Officials loyal to her, promoted quietly. Rival families found themselves edged into obscurity. Every movement of the palace became a reflection of her design, though the world outside still perceived only the faintest glimmer of change. Historians debate whether her consolidation was rapid and decisive or gradual and patient, but the result was unmistakable. The Empress held the reins of power with an unerring hand. In private, Wu Zetian balanced reflection with strategy. Nights were long and quiet, and she would often visit the palace library, tracing the stories of past dynasties, past empresses, and their triumphs and failures. Could the cautionary tales of history guide her, or was her destiny unique, written by the delicate intersection of fate, ambition, and timing? The answer remained elusive, a whisper carried on the winter winds outside the palace walls. Even the smallest details became instruments of influence. She rearranged the palace gardens subtly, aligning paths so that favored ministers would pass through carefully curated scenes, soft water features, and bronze statues directing mood and thought. Mechanical birds, hidden in lattices, chirped at intervals that seemed almost deliberate, delighting some courtiers while unnerving others. Every element of sensory experience, the scent of incense, the rustle of silk, the touch of polished railings, was an extension of her quiet dominion. Outside the palace, the empire stirred with its ordinary rhythms. Market sellers huddled over steaming bowls of millet porridge. Couriers braved frost-bitten roads to deliver scrolls and decrees. The edges of the empire, from Korea to the deserts of the West, awaited instructions that now passed first through the Empress's careful assessment. The empire itself became a stage for her growing mastery. Then came the day when Gaozong, too weak even to attend court, acknowledged her authority publicly. Ministers who had once whispered discontent bowed openly, and officials from distant provinces sent gifts and messages of loyalty. Wu Zetian's voice, though quiet in its first years, now resonated through the empire, and yet, as always, shadows remained. Plots simmered in hidden chambers, jealous rivals watched for a moment's hesitation, and history, ever capricious, seemed ready to test her resolve. By nightfall, the palace was draped in silver frost. Lanterns glimmered through latticed windows. Wu Zetian stood by the inner balcony, watching the distant city, its streets veiled in snow. In that stillness, a single certainty prevailed. The time had come to step fully into destiny, to transform influence into absolute authority. The moment of final ascent approached, and with it, the shape of history itself seemed to bend toward her vision. The first hints of spring stirred in the distant mountains, though Chang'an remained shrouded in lingering frost, a quiet reminder of the long winter past. In the palace, lanterns burned steadily against the shadows, casting their soft glow on jade ornaments and polished tiles. Wu Zetian moved with purpose, yet with a calm that seemed to slow the very passage of time, each step deliberate, measured, resonant with the authority she had gradually woven around herself. Gaozong lay in the inner chambers, frail and exhausted. His eyes, once commanding, now glanced at the world with the softness of clouds drifting across the morning sky. Ministers gathered for the first time without pretense, their whispers hushed, all understanding that true guidance no longer resided solely with the emperor. Wu Zetian's counsel shaped every decision, every edict, every appointment. In the quiet hush of the halls, it was clear that the dynasty itself bent toward her vision, delicate yet irreversible. Ceremonies were held to honor the departed vigor of Gaozong, while subtly signaling the presence of new authority. Lanterns traced pathways across courtyards where snow had melted into shallow puddles, the reflections of statues and banners rippling like dreams. She supervised each detail, the placement of banners, the cadence of drums, the order in which officials presented tributes. Even these minor gestures became a symphony of power, each note echoing her influence. Yet Wu Zetian did not walk blindly into triumph. She remained vigilant, aware of plots simmering in shadowed corridors, of dissenting ministers, of families whose pride and grievance had not faded. She studied their movements as one might trace the flight of a bird, reading intention in posture, tone, and the subtle tremor of hands. Scholars still debate whether her caution stemmed from strategic genius, survival instinct, or both. Could it be that all three merged in her mind, seamless and inevitable? Outside, life pulsed with ordinary rhythm. Streets of Chang'an carried the scent of fresh bread, the hum of commerce, the laughter of children chasing kites. Caravans returned along the Silk Road, bringing spices, jewels, and tales from distant lands. News of Wu Zetian's rising prominence travelled with them, a quiet recognition that power had shifted, though its full implications remained hidden to those far beyond the palace gates. Inside the inner court, she orchestrated her final steps. Gaozong, conscious yet weakened, acknowledged her role fully before officials. His nod, slight and unresisting, confirmed that the Empress was no longer acting in shadow. She was the axis around which the Tang Empire now turned. Courtiers bowed, ministers acquiesced, and a new era began, marked not by proclamation alone, but by the subtle, pervasive certainty of her influence. In the evening, she walked through the palace gardens. The scent of thawing earth and early blossoms mingled with the aroma of incense, still burning in small shrines. Her gaze swept over bronze statues, stone bridges, and flowing water, each detail a testament to patience, observation, and careful action. For a moment, history seemed suspended, the empire balanced between memory and anticipation. And as the moon rose, pale and silver, over the frozen ponds now beginning to melt, Wu Zetian's presence settled into the very bones of the palace. She had survived exile, intrigue, mourning, and suspicion. She had navigated every subtle current of power, weaving a path from concubine to consort to the uncontested influence beside the emperor. The dynasty was hers to guide, and in the quiet of the night, a single truth emerged. Destiny had always bent toward her vision, and now it could no longer turn away. In the soft hush, the palace exhaled, the lanterns flickered gently, and the empire entered a new rhythm. Wu Zetian, at last, stood fully within the sphere of power she had shaped, poised to leave a mark on history as no other woman had before. The city of Chang'an settled into a gentle quiet. The streets slowly emptied as night deepened. Snow had fully melted from the palace gardens, leaving wet stone paths that reflected lantern light like liquid amber. The air was slimped, often cool, carrying faint hints of incense, wood smoke, and the damp earth beyond the walls. Bronze statues, dragons and phoenixes carved into garden bridges seemed to gleam with their own subdued energy under the silver moon. The soft trickle of water from melted ice in the koi ponds created a rhythm both soothing and eternal. Within the palace, Wu Zetian moved with a calm presence, her footsteps quiet but purposeful, almost in harmony with the night itself. Courtiers and attendants had long retreated, leaving only echoes in the marble corridors. In this serene solitude, every detail of her world, the polished tiles, the flutter of silk, the gentle sway of lanterns, told of an empire guided by steady, unseen hands. The blend of power and patience, observation and subtlety, had culminated in a quiet triumph, a realization that history's shape could bend in the hands of one determined mind. Outside, the sounds of the city softened, carrying the gentle murmur of distant rivers, the occasional call of a nightbird, and the rustle of leaves in gardens and forests. Time itself seemed to slow, giving space for reflection, for understanding the delicate interplay of ambition, wisdom, and destiny. And as the lantern's light dimmed, and the city, the palace, and the empire exhaled together, the story of Wu Zetian's rise lingered in the quiet. A woman who had navigated exile, intrigue, and uncertainty to leave an indelible mark upon history. Her presence, her influence, and her vision would remain, quietly shaping the empire, the people, and the legacy she had created. The The night deepened, the world softened, and all was ready to drift into the calm embrace of sleep. Good night, everyone, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow the interesting stories waiting ahead.